The Roman Empire was at its height. Wide highways, marble palaces, and flags of victory were waving in every land. Life in the streets of Rome flowed like a swift river, but behind that glory lay a law and bloodshed. On the throne of the empire sat a king named Maximus. He was a hard-hearted but skilled warrior. His eyes were as cold as iron. He believed that the empire could be sustained only by the power of the sword. But in one corner of the palace was a young man, who was different from the others, Prince Arrian. Arrian was more interested in reading books and learning philosophy than wielding a sword. He often talked to Greek philosophers and dreamed of the future by looking at the stars. One night he stood on the roof of the palace, looking at the stars shining in the sky and saying, "Will there ever be a city of Rome, where knowledge is honored, where children have not swords but pens in their hands?" At that moment a voice came from behind, "Prince, these dreams are dangerous in Rome." This was the voice of his old friend Elena, who was a kinswoman of the court, but had been Arrian's companion. Since childhood, Arrian smiled and said, "Dreams are not dangerous, Elena. Dreams are lamps that guide the way in the dark." At that time, the king summoned Arrian to the court. When Arrian came to the court, the king's face became visible, and he said, "Arrian, the time has come for you to go to the borders of the empire and shed the blood of the enemies. Books and philosophies will not make you king. If you want to be my heir, you must prove it on the battlefield." Arrian leaned over and said, "Father, I will obey your command." But something else was burning in his heart. He knew that this journey would be a test of his life. After the battle, Arrian returned to Rome. People threw flowers at the city gates. Children shouted happily and women prayed. King Maximus organized a great celebration at the court. In the midst of the court, Arrian was seated on the golden throne and declared, "This is the heir of Rome, who defeated the enemy in the first war." But there was a silent anxiety in Arrian's heart instead of joy. He knew that this praise was in return for the blood shed by his hands. At the same time, a new character entered the court, Marquis Coma, who was an advisor to the king and a very clever man. Marquis was jealous in his heart when he saw the popularity of Arrian. He thought, "If this prince has captured the hearts of the people, my influence will cease. I will turn him from the way." Marquis secretly brought with him a few officers and soldiers of the palace. He began to plot against Arrian. Arrian was confused in his world. He often sat in the palace library for hours reading books and thinking, "Can Rome be conquered not only by the sword but also by the pen?" One day he said to Elaine, "I dream of a new empire, Elena. One where the courts will dispense justice, where the light of knowledge will reach every house, and where the bells of peace will sound instead of war." Elaine smiled and replied, "These are big dreams, Arrian, but only the big dreamers change history." At that moment, someone knocked softly on the door. It was Arrian's old friend and military colleague Cassius. He said in a low tone, "Prince, be careful. There is a conspiracy against you in the court. The Marquis wants to prove you a traitor." Arrian was shocked. "Traitor, I am ready to die for Rome." Cassius said, "That's the problem. You think for humanity, not for Rome. And the court doesn't like princes like that." Upon hearing this, Arrian awakens both fear and courage in his heart. He realizes that he must now do more than just dream. He must fight a new battle to save his kingdom, his future and his dreams. A battle that will be fought not on the field, but in hearts and minds. The next morning Arrian set out for the eastern part of the empire, accompanied by thousands of Roman soldiers. The thunder of horses, the rustling of swords, and the lightning of the shields felt as if fire were burning in the sky. On the way, Arrian remained silent. He often thought as he walked with the soldiers, was man born only for war? Can an empire be strong only by shedding blood? Elena also secretly joined him in the convoy. She lived among the soldiers, dressed in ordinary kinnis, so that she could accompany Arrian. At night, when all the soldiers were asleep, they would sit outside the tent and talk about the dreams of the future. One day the convoy stopped by the Uranus River. There was news that the Berber, tribes of the north, had invaded the borders of Rome. A fear arose in Arrian's heart. This was the first war of his life. The next morning, when the sun shone, the battlefield was ready. Roman soldiers stood in rows, shields lifted and spears drawn. Before them the Berber tribes, whose faces seemed stained with blood, shouted and wailed. He had a sword in his hand. But in his heart there was a storm, and he said to himself, "If I retreat, Rome will consider me weak. If I go forward, this land of blood will bury my conscience." Suddenly a barbarian warrior turned, straight to Arrian. Arrian twisted his sword, in panic, and the enemy fell to the ground. This was his first victory, but a burden fell on his heart. He had taken life, but he could not find peace. The battle lasted for several hours. Finally, Rome was victorious, and the enemy retreated. The Roman soldiers joyfully shouted, "Caesar lives!" But Arrian remained silent. In his eyes, the enemy warrior he had killed came again and again. At night, when everyone was celebrating, Helena found Arrian sitting alone. "Why are you not happy, Arrian? You have won the battle for Rome today." Arrian said in a soft voice, "I have taken a life for Rome, but what has lived for humanity?" Did they both know that the war was actually in Arrian's heart? Arrian knew that time was running like a fast horse. The intrigues of Marquis were deepening. Some of the ministers of the court began to look at Arrian with suspicion. Even King Maximus sometimes questioned him. "Arrian, why do you spend so much time in the books? Is your sword weak?" Arrian responded with literature. "O father, the kingdom can be conquered by the sword, but it is established only by justice and knowledge." This did not please the king, but he remained silent. At the same time, the Marquis decided that Arrian should be destroyed forever. One night he ordered some soldiers to arrest the prince and put him in prison. When Arrian was imprisoned, Helena was stunned to go with him. And in the dark chamber Arrian reached the walls of the prison, instead of the sky, and said, "Helena, maybe these walls will stop my dream." Elaine held her hand and replied, "Dreams are not bound, Arrian. They are as free as birds. Your dreams will live after you." At that moment there was a charisma. Cassius, who was still faithful to Arrian, came secretly into the prison cell and said, "Prince, I have little time. I have put the wheels in. This is the opportunity. Run away." Ryan thought for a moment and said, "No, I do not want to be a fugitive king. If my dream is true, it is greater than the walls of Rome." In the morning, when the court began, Marquis accused Arrian of treason. The people began to shout. But at the same moment Helena went forward and told Arrian's dream before the whole court. She said, "This prince is not a traitor. This prince is the light that can bring Rome out of darkness." The people's hearts began to change. The soldiers of the court, who were with Marquis until yesterday, began to speak in favor of Arrian today. Finally, King Maximus ruled. Arrian is not guilty, but Rome is not yet ready for his dreams. So the king forgave Arrian and ordered him to build a new city outside the palace, where he could try his dreams. Arrian and Helena were released from prison and settled in a valley outside the city. There Arrian established schools, lit candles of knowledge, and began to share justice in the courts. Gradually, people began to call the settlement the Rome of Light. The plot failed and he died alone. Years later, when Arrian grew old, one night he looked at the sky with Helena and said, "I won Rome not by the sword, but by dreams, and this is my real empire." A star broke in the sky and both silently handed over their dream to future generations. Thus the story of Prince Arrian ended, but his dreams lived on. The Roman Empire may have survived with swords, but in the hearts of the people. Arrian's Rome, the empire of light, knowledge and justice, remained eternally inhabited.